Our topic today is 4.2, the expansion of Islam. Our goal today is for you to be able to explain how the Islamic Caliphate or the Islamic community grew and changed after the time of the Prophet Muhammad. So you can see here in our timeline, each dot now represents 100 years, and the fall of the Western Roman Empire is right here, and that's just about 100 years before the Islamic faith is founded by the Prophet Muhammad. Soon after that, it does split between two groups, the Sunni and the Shiite, but you see this quick expansion of the Islamic Caliphate after the Prophet's time, so we're going to be looking at what exactly happened after the Prophet Muhammad passed away. So that's our first key question we're going to be answering today is who led the Islamic Caliphate or the Islamic community after the Prophet Muhammad died? So you're probably asking yourself, what exactly is a caliphate? What is this word? A caliphate means the unified religious and political community led by the Prophet Muhammad during his life. But that community continued to live on after he died. So when I say a unified religious and political community, what I really mean here is that the religious community is everyone who is a Muslim, who practices the Islamic faith. That's the religious community. The political community is the government that rules over these lands. And so the caliphate is these two things, the religious aspect and the political aspect, the religion and the government combined under one thing. And the Prophet Muhammad was both the religious leader of the community, he was their prophet, and he was also the political leader of the Muslim community being called the Ummah. By political leader, I mean he was in charge of their government. So the caliphate itself was actually centered on the city of Medina. Right here, you can see on both maps, right? So Medina is centered on all these trade routes that go to the Persia, go to the Byzantine Empire. And as Islam quickly expanded, it sometimes grew beyond the political borders of lands controlled by the Arab people. And so the caliphate really is this community that's both the religious community, but also the political community at the same time. So what happened to the Prophet Muhammad? So in 632 Common Era, he died of an illness, and there became this dilemma. Who's going to be in charge of the caliphate after their political and religious leader passes away? Well, after the death of Muhammad, they chose a successor. That's what the word caliph means. Caliph means successor, the person who comes after Muhammad and leads as the religious and political leader after the Prophet Muhammad has passed away. It's important to know that caliphs are not prophets, right? They are not prophets, but they are the religious and political leader of the caliphate. Now, prophets are appointed by God. Caliphs were not. They were elected and led based on the Quran and the Sunnah, as we talked about in a previous lesson. The first four of these successors, or caliphs, were known as the rightly guided caliphs, and here are their names right here. We're going to talk about why that is in a minute, and why they're referred to as the rightly guided caliphs. But under their leadership, Islam spread very, very quickly, quicker than pretty much any other religion in history, which should lead you to that next key question. Why was Islam able to expand so quickly during this time? Well, much like Christianity in the time of the Romans, Islam had a very appealing message. It focused on justice, fairness, hope, and community, just like we saw in the messages of Jesus of Nazareth. It also had a promise of paradise after death, again, similar to what we saw why Christianity was so appealing to Romans. There's a lot of overlap between these two, and again, it is because Christians and Muslims and Jews all worship the same God, so of course there's going to be overlap. People also found this faith appealing because of the way it treated people. The Quran itself forbid forced conversion, which means to become a Muslim, you have to willingly choose it for yourself, freely, without being forced or without being influenced by anyone else. And especially for Christians and Jews, there was a very, very good treatment by Muslims. You were able to live within the caliphate, you would be able to work, have your own business, you were treated equally under the law. The only real difference was that you had to pay an extra tax instead of being forced into military service. And so essentially, there was a lot of religious tolerance of Christians and Jews within the Islamic Caliphate, which led a lot of people to willingly convert to the faith as well. Not just because of the being treated so well, but also to avoid this tax. Everyone who lived within the caliphate who was not a Muslim was allowed to keep their property, keep their religion, their leaders, and were essentially able to live as they were before the Islamic Caliphate, just with some additional restrictions, such as that extra tax Christians and Jews had to pay. The next big reason why it was able to spread so quickly was, well, because of that common answer, trade routes, right? Medina, the center of the caliphate, and Mecca, the religious center of the community, were both on major trade routes that linked all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, the Indian Ocean, the Silk Road here, which goes all the way to India and China. And so religion spreads along trade routes just like items do, right? Also, it unified the Arab tribes, making travel safer at this time, so more trade of resources and ideas were possible. Before the spread of Islam, right, the Arabic tribes here were constantly at war with each other. But once they're unified under a single religion that preaches peace to each other and unifies them into a single political community, they're no longer fighting each other, which means trade and travel becomes much, much more easy, and their religion is able to spread across those trade routes as well. Then there's also the fact that conversion brought benefits to the merchants, right? So there's this extra layer of trust between buyers and sellers. If both the buyer and seller were Muslims, then they shared this common belief system, which made it more willing for people to trust and trade with each other. Also, Muslims were also exempt from some taxes, so that led to some people who are merchants to convert as well willingly, just to avoid those taxes. Again, people converted both willingly because of the appealing message, but also some would convert because of, well, the tax implications as well. So the Caliphate itself had a shared currency and language, right? In order to read the Quran, which was a requirement of the faith, and the Quran was only written in Arabic, so everyone would learn Arabic. But it also had a shared currency. So these two things, shared language, shared money, made trade a lot easier. The easier trade was, the faster the religion would spread. Then, of course, the military expansion was a really big part of this as well, as the political aspect of this caliphate spread out with its armies conquering new lands, bringing their religion with them. Now, the Islamic faith said that Muslims could not hurt other Muslims, that they could not take the property of other Muslims, so some would convert in order to gain some level of protection from the raids of these expanding armies. At the same time, you saw the two big powerhouses of the region, the Persians to their east and the Byzantines to their west, well, they had been weakened by centuries of fighting each other just at the time the Arabic tribes here in the Arabian Peninsula had unified and began spreading out. So the Islamic armies were fresh, they were disciplined, they had skilled commanders. At the exact moment the Byzantines and the Persians were kind of weakened from these centuries of warfare, which made it rather easy for Muslims to expand their caliphate borders to the west and the east, and met minimum resistance. Now, the Persians and the Byzantines did fight back. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but they just weren't as well disciplined or as skilled as fighters because of the centuries of warfare between the two of them. So I mentioned the first four caliphs were known as the rightly guided caliphs. So what happened to the caliphate after those four rightly guided? Why are the later caliphs not referred to as the rightly guided ones? Well, I'll tell you. First is because of internal conflict and division. The third caliph was assassinated, which led to a civil war splintering the Islamic faith into three big branches. The first were known as the Shia, and they said that the caliph must be a descendant from Muhammad's line, so they must be related in some way to the family of Muhammad. The second group, the Sunni, said that the caliph could be chosen by the community following the Sunnah, the teachings and sayings of the Prophet, but didn't need to be directly related to the Prophet. And the third group are known as the Sufi, and they more sought spiritual devotion over political power, and didn't really want to get involved in the whole political aspect of the community, wanted to focus more on the spiritual or religious aspect of the caliphate, so they didn't get involved in the civil wars as much. Now, the Sunni kind of won this conflict. The vast majority of Muslims today are Sunni Muslims, not Shia Muslims, but they're still fighting between these groups over who deserved to be the next caliph, right? Someone who was a descendant of Muhammad's line, or just someone chosen by the community who follows the Sunnah, the teachings. So there's a lot of bloodshed in the world over this, and before you cast any judgment on this, right, Christians also fight Christians for being the wrong type of Christian. It's just a thing people do about religion. So what comes next after the rightly guided caliphs is called the Umayyad Caliphate. Essentially, this family known as the Umayyads, they kind of take over the religious and political control of the community, and they continue with the expansion of the caliphates into the areas of North Africa, Central Asia, and even into Europe up into Spain, the former Roman province of Hispania, which becomes known as the Kingdom of Al-Andalus. Now, the Umayyad Caliphate maintained Arabic as the official language of the caliphate, so they kept that going as well. They also continued tolerance for people under the book under a poll tax, that is, Jews and Christians were allowed to continue to live as they were as long as they paid that tax. And they preserved a lot of Sharia law as the foundation of governance. So a lot of things kept going the same under the Umayyads as under the rightly guided caliph. But of course, they did make some major changes that distinguishes them as different from the rightly guided caliphs. So, whereas Medina used to be at the center of the caliphate under the Umayyad dynasty, they moved the capital up here to Damascus. The reason for this was they thought it would be easier to govern this larger territory further away from this massive desert. It's more centrally located. And this was modeled after the empires that they were surrounded by, and this is the beginning of their transition from a mostly religious community to a political empire. And again, as I said, the caliphate always had political and religious aspects to it, but under the Umayyads, they really start this transition to being more of like a political empire like you saw with the Byzantines and the Persians. And as part of this transition to a more political empire, the caliphs shifted to a more luxurious lifestyle. Instead of living simply as just one of equals in the community to help interpret the religious teachings, the caliphs became more like emperors and started to live in that life of luxury. And they added another layer here. So, whereas Islamic teachings taught that all Muslims are equal, the Umayyad dynasty started to favor Arab Muslims over non Arab converts to Islam. So, essentially, Arabs are people from Arabia, but then people in the empire, as it expanded out to North Africa and Hispania and further east, these were not Arabs, but they did convert to Islam. But the Umayyads treated them differently when it came to jobs in the administration of the empire, and this added another layer to the social hierarchy of the caliphate. I'll show you what I mean in the next slide. So theoretically, the Islamic Caliphate's social hierarchy should look like this, with Muslims on the top, all equal to each other, the people of the book, Christians and Jews, below them, right? They have a lot of the same rights, it's just they have to pay that extra tax, and then the pagans, the people who are not Christians, Muslims, or Jews, are kind of at the bottom of this hierarchy. Theoretically, this is what it's supposed to be like. Under the Umayyad Caliphate, you actually have this extra layer, right? So there is the Arab Muslims, then the non-Arab Muslims, then the people of the book, and then the pagans. And so this division of Arab versus non-Arab Muslims is something that really kind of gets introduced in the Umayyad Caliphate. So you see some kind of corruption of the original teachings of Islam, just like we see the corruption of the original teachings of Christianity. But this is what happens when government interferes with religion. It's why in America, we're supposed to have these two things being separate. And then as the empire becomes more of a political empire and less of a religious community, you get one further division with the ruling family gets to be on top, followed by the Arab Muslims, non-Arab Muslims, people of the book, and the pagans. So again, you're seeing this hierarchy reforming. It's just something our species seems to always recreate. Now, the Umayyads making a lot of change to the community, which made some people not really happy, right? They're straying away from the original teachings of the Prophet and the first rightly guided caliphs, and so some people get upset, especially one family known as the Abbasids. And well, they wind up overthrowing the Umayyads, killing almost all family members in the Umayyads, except those in Al-Andalus, and they take over the caliphate. Now, there's some things that do remain the same. So, for instance, the caliph remains the religious and political leader of the community. Arabic is still the unifying language of the faith. It's also the language of their government and of all educated, learned people in the community. They also, again, maintain this tolerance for the people of the book, Christians and Jews, and they continued the vast trade networks across land and sea that spread really all across Afro-Eurasia. Again, Afro-Eurasia being a phrase for Africa, Europe, and Asia, as they're all kind of connected by this vast web of interconnected trade networks. So there, again, is a lot of continuity, a lot of similarities between the rightly guided caliphs, the Umayyad Caliphate, and the Abbasid Caliphate. But there are also changes, right? The overthrow of the Umayyads in 750 came because the Abbasids thought the Umayyads strayed too far from Islamic teachings. So non-Arab converts felt oppressed, and when a large group of people feel oppressed, they tend to rise up and overthrow their rulers. The Abbasids claimed that they were descendants of Muhammad's uncle, which gave them religious legitimacy to their movement. And you see this again a lot of times, trying to find this connection to religion in order to justify their control over the government. Again, this is a common theme we keep seeing over and over again, rulers trying to use religion to justify their power over the people in the territory they rule over. Now, whereas the Abbasids controlled all this section of the caliphate, right? North Africa, Arabia, the Middle East, or Mesopotamia over here, Persia, all the way even into parts of India, the Umayyads maintained control over here in Hispania in their kingdom of Al-Andalus. The Abbasids moved the capital from Damascus to a new city they built called Baghdad, which is the capital of Iraq today, right in the heart of Mesopotamia. And Baghdad becomes a center of learning for the world, and they create some of the largest libraries and universities at the time. The Abbasids also opened government jobs to non Arab Muslims, so again, kind of trying to break down some of the hierarchy that the Umayyads created. And while the Abbasids did expand some of the borders slightly of the caliphate, they shifted focus from conquering new lands to essentially administering or controlling the territories that was already part of this empire, fostering economic growth in order to promote trade, and promoting culture and learning across the community. It's at this time the new city of Baghdad here, as well as Cairo in Egypt, and then over here in the Umayyad Caliphate, in Al Adanis, Cordoba become centers of science, literature, and art, and really become the most educated areas in most of the world at this time. All right, that's all I have for you today. When I see you next in class, we're going to be digging deeper into the role of caliphs and the golden age of the Islamic Caliphate and a lot of the advancements of the Islamic people during this time. For now, though, as usual, rewrite today's goal, identify 3 important facts from these notes that you've learned that help you understand that goal. Again, use complete sentences, complete thoughts, not just a couple of words, but an actual full sentence. Noun, verbs, adjectives, yes, all that. And then write one question you still have that I can help answer for you in order to show some curiosity and help solidify this information in your brain. Until next class, I'll see you then.